Hope, hope you're feeling better. I'm starting the webinar. You're going to start to see people roll in. I'll do some housekeeping and we'll get started.
Well, and just to set the stage, Mike, I know last time we chatted, you were 3 Dunkin' Donut coffees into it, and you were a little.
We're live, by the way, just so you know.
Great. So just want to know what we're dealing with today.
I'm on my second coffee today, so you're in good shape. Hi, everybody. It's Mike Cadieux. We're just getting started. Some people rolling into the live studio audience, which is this Zoom call that you registered for. Hello, Tamna. I'm sorry, Tamna, I think. And we're spinning up the encoder for Restream. It looks like we're live on Twitter and we're LinkedIn live. Tina is in the background as always. Tina, are we live on LinkedIn yet?
We are.
Thank you, Tina. Tina's under the weather today, folks, so send out some good vibes. I hope Tina feels better. At Procurement Foundry, we need Tina to be well, or else, if Mama's not happy, nobody's happy, basically. So anyway, thank you, Tina. I hope that you feel better. Good to see everybody. I'm going to just run through a couple of housekeeping tips. There are 4 exits on this webinar. There's 2 in the front, 2 in the rear. None of the laboratories work, so if you need to use your own, feel free. I am here with the guys from Tropic today. I am thrilled to have them back, David Campbell and Michael Shields. Hi, guys. How are you?
What's up?
I feel like I should have my rally cap on. Shields got his hat on backwards. I'm like, bro, with Super Bowl weekend, let's get after it.
I just got to keep up with Dave's mustache and mullet. So,
Yeah, you can't tell. You can't really tell when the hat's on. I wasn't sure whether to let it flow or not for the webinar, but thanks for calling it out.
The entrepreneurial mullet. I like it. Probably the only guy I've talked to, definitely the only guy I've talked to in 2023 so far with a mullet. But the NHL hockey All-Star game was the other day. Hi, everybody. Thank you for chiming in. You're already doing it. So sending Tina birthday wishes from this week and also telling us where you're from. So feel free to roll through. Looks like we got 40 or 50 people here already. Wow, booming. So tell us where you're from. We are live streaming on LinkedIn Live, just so that all of you know that. So we probably have 40 or 50 people here and another 20 or 30 people over there. If you are on LinkedIn Live, don't feel left out. We can actually hear you and listen to you. Tina is monitoring LinkedIn Live. So if during the conversation you have questions for myself, Michael, or David, feel free to type them on LinkedIn. Tina will get them over to us. Inside of this room, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom if you want. I don't recommend it. I like the free flow. Feel free to put your questions into the chat so everybody can see them, because they start to feed off of each other. But then Michael and David and I also can see those and pivot off of those. I hate holding questions to the end, just FYI. I love to make this interactive and exciting as usual. Hello, Minnesota. I hope it's not -30. So we don't want to hold questions to the end. Feel free to just chuck them in anytime you want. If you want to ask David about his hairdresser and where he gets his mullet, that would be a great question to start off with. Topic for today, gentlemen. How to buy SaaS smarter in 2023? Huge question right now, given the fact that we're in the economic times that we're in, and the fact that it looks like everybody's talking about SaaS. Tips from top finance and procurement leaders. So you guys are going to talk to us a little bit about what you're hearing just in your day-to-day activities associated with your finance connections and with your procurement leaders. I'd love to hear some good nuggets. So with that, strap in. It's going to be a great hour. Let's get started. So some quick introductions. I hate to make introductions. So let's start with David Campbell first, and then we'll go to Michael. David, tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, a little bit about your role at Tropic, which if you're under a rock, you don't know who David is yet, but he'll tell you. And a little bit about the Tropic product and what you guys do, just for anybody who this is their first time in. And then Michael, obviously, you do the same thing as well.
Yeah, so great to see everybody. If we've met before, it's great to see you again. David Campbell, CEO and co-founder of Tropic, employee number 1. By way of background, grew up on a cattle ranch in Mojave Desert, school at Berkeley, tried to be a novelist first, failed at that, got into tech. And I actually came at this problem from the sales side, joined a very early stage marketing technology company where, as the first sales hire, we were selling into marketing teams at other early stage companies who had no procurement practices whatsoever. And it was unbelievable how efficiently they would spend, which was something that, in those days we would capitalize on, right? And then moved up market, started, then experiencing procurement departments. And what I realized selling into mid-market procurement departments was, here was a team that really needed a lot of data and tools that they didn't have available, where our sales team had this like mountain of data and tools, because sales is the tip of the spear and gets all the investment. And then moved ultimately into the enterprise level. I was a global business manager at Microsoft. And I'll never forget that a very challenging Microsoft renewal led directly to layoffs inside a customer, because it was really hard for them to get out from underneath the commitments that had been made to Microsoft. And I realized then, small early stage companies really struggle to buy and manage software effectively. Mid-markets are struggling. And at the enterprise level, you might lay off 2,000 people if you buy software ineffectively. And that felt wrong to me. And I thought, I'm kind of on the wrong side of history here. So I chose to quit and decided to start a company dedicated to empowering the buy side and making it easier to buy software. And that's what Tropic is. So Tropic's a suite of data tools and services that's designed basically to bring efficiency to your purchasing and management process of your software stack, save you time, save you money, and extend your runway. So that's as short as I can make my usual long story there. I'm very excited to be here with everybody and talk about something that I'm extremely passionate about.
I love this webinar already because it's at my speed. So if you took your ADD medication today, you're probably going to want to play this back at 3/4 speed. If you're not, like I didn't, you're going to rock and roll, because this is going to be the first one that's actually at the right speed for you. Michael Shields, how are you, buddy? Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your role, and what's going on with you.
Cool. I'm hanging out in Austin today. We've got an offsite here, but I'm residence for me is in Utah. So enjoying the weather warmer. Dave, I don't know if I should have let you go first. I don't know if my history is as exciting as yours.
Just make
struggling artist goes to MarTech, gets disavowed with sales, and decides to go help people get better pricing. Right? That's the.
I'm gonna work on making my elevator pitch a little more interesting. But look, I've been in procurement. My whole career started out for a number of years in a Fortune 100 company. I did get to work across the globe, and travel and just kind of see how procurement worked, in different countries and different continents, and moved from direct to indirect. Probably the biggest change in my career was when I left manufacturing and joined tech, right? Because procurement within tech is really very unique and very interesting, right? So I joined Qualtrics, stood up the procurement function there, scaled it up to a pretty nice sized team, and wow, what a hell of a ride that was. The Qualtrics story is just incredible, and it continued to grow. I mean, I know the term rocket ship is used a lot, but Qualtrics was just an incredible rocket ship. I actually met Dave while I was working there in the summer of 2020, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were 4 or 5 employees at the time, and
that's right.
We started talking procurement, and this is just something that I geek out about. And I think, Dave is one of the few people on earth that respected that, just the excitement around, around procurement, but started as an advisor for Tropic. I would eventually move on to be the vice president of procurement at a company called MX, but it wasn't long before, Tropic had grown to a couple hundred people, and Dave was like, hey, we could really use you here at the company. And so really I'm helping take all that experience and really knowledge as a working procurement professional with a lot of experience in SaaS, and incorporate that into, our team of negotiators, which is a very large team, and making sure that they're very effective at what they do, to even our product, right? Our SaaS product, and making sure it solves, the problems that, procurement leaders and finance leaders have. And it's been, only a few weeks so far, but it's been a fun ride for sure. So.
That's cool, man. I like the fact that you're taking your experience on one side of the table and moving it to the other, and hopefully helping the masses, right? I mean, that's kind of, I guess, your role is to show people how valuable this can all be, and share from your experiences, and help people understand the value proposition, and maybe get over some of the, I don't know, agita associated with potentially engaging something like a Tropic, right?
No, absolutely. And in fact, if you're in procurement, right? I mean, look, it's tough to see the market soften, and it's tough to see, companies do layoffs and things of that nature, but there's certainly a silver lining when you're in procurement, because, I think about to the growth days where what did investors really care about? They cared about revenues, right? And you could get as a founder, you could get these crazy multiples if your revenues were high, right? And so as a procurement guy, I'd go out and save $1 million, and it's like, hey, cool, great, that's awesome, right? But really, the leaders were focused on the growth. Well, right now, like leaders, CEOs, CFOs, like they are very interested in what procurement can do for them, right? And I think we can dive into a lot of those reasons, but as a procurement person, I see this as a wonderful opportunity to step up and shine and show the value that procurement can bring. And it's also exciting too to see the investment in the procurement space, right? I talked to a lot of companies that are, solving some of the problems that really have been managed by a few bigger companies that maybe not necessarily have not kept up with the needs of procurement over the years. And so seeing the investment in that space is awesome.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think some of the larger companies, they get a little bit more comfortable and complacent, I guess is probably the right word, and they don't want to innovate as quickly. And there's companies like Tropic that come along and start to innovate at a rapid pace, and that's what drives the market, right? So in the buy tech space, I think we're blessed with the fact that so many entries into the buy tech space like Tropic are here, that we're in this explosion. We're in the 2003 era of buy tech, I think. Let's talk about, David, everybody's talking about SaaS right now, right? And SaaS acquisition models and things like that. Everybody's talking about how they need to get control over their SaaS, how much their SaaS has actually grown. It used to be kind of you had an IT category manager somewhere inside of your procurement organization, depending upon your maturity level. And that guy was usually responsible for the SaaS portfolio. Then in the biggest shops, you had software management firms like, Walmart and our friend Brad over at Walmart, right? God bless them. But in a lot of organizations now, SaaS is becoming its own thing because it literally touches everything, right? So, what's happening? Tell me a little bit about this trend from your perspective. And tell me a little bit about maybe, is there a particular sector that this is happening in? Is it the size or maturity levels of organizations? Is there a geography or an industry that this is blown up in? Is it bigger in pharmaceutical than in auto manufacturing? Or is it's just everywhere, man?
Yeah, great question. So, my particular bias on this topic is that I truly believe that on a long enough time horizon, every single company is going to be a software company, right? Companies are increasingly digitizing physical products. COVID-19 was obviously a massive catalytic moment where every single company overnight needed to figure out operationally how to support a distributed remote workforce, and that obviously runs entirely on software. So we see there already was, I think, a pre-Cambrian explosion of SaaS into the world, right? And I think it was driven by venture capital, largely the fact that financial institutions realized that this new thing, cloud software, you could get a 50x multiple on this thing versus a 3x on something else. So the dollars flowed into these solutions, their sales reps contacted your organizations, COVID happened and forced this big change. And then 2021 was the most insane year for venture capital investment of all time. And software got a huge boost through that, right? And what happens in that growth at all costs economy, kind of related to my story about my background, is those companies take that money and they invest in sales and marketing because that's what they're getting graded on. And investing in sales and marketing in 2021 meant buying tools, more tools. Right. Doesn't matter how much we're spending, we'll throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. And we'll sign up for annual contracts, 2-year contracts, 3-year contracts. And we saw that in our customer base, at least, that the empowerment of procurement was challenged in 2021 because growth was so important, right? And it was easier to bypass some of those, existing processes. So everyone wound up with way too much software at once because all these different forces are colliding.
Right.
Obviously, that's receded completely, but that receding completely doesn't relieve you of your obligations to pay all these vendors that everybody bought, right? So now we find ourselves in this world where everybody has too much software. Everybody is overpaying for it by 30%. And when I say everybody, I'm kind of focusing on our customer base, honestly, which is a lot of companies that are, either technology companies or tech adjacent companies that have distributed workforces. They may have software in the top 3 line items. Maybe it's number 2 in terms of overall expenses to the business. And the reason I think that's important is while that may not be how every business looks today, I believe that it will be how every business looks tomorrow. I think that distributed workforces are not going anywhere for a lot of these big companies, and companies that are too slow moving are going to be disrupted by innovative companies, and those companies all use software. So software is going nowhere but up. But, the last thing that I'll say is the trend that kind of started this whole conversation. The market is now demanding something very different. I was reacting to Paula in the chat. I said, 2023 is the year of procurement. We saw it starting in 2022, where, I kind of cheekily said to Shields when we were talking about the session that savings is the new sales. The thing that you get graded on in the public market, in the late stage private sector, if you want to raise money, if you want to sell your business, whatever it is, you get graded now on efficiency. You get graded on profitability. You get graded on things that require efficient purchasing versus efficient selling, like you did in 2021. So that's the trend. It's tidal wave came in, settled into many different organizations, contracts got locked up, and now every finance leader, every procurement leader wants to figure out how to reduce them. And that's kind of where we find ourselves today. Now, what I would say, the last thing that I'll say is I think we are now at a slightly more evolved moment from then. I think there was this moment in early 2022, I think it was Q2 when the market originally dipped, where it was like, gotta save, get every vendor on the phone, renegotiate every contract. And that's great. You got to pull the weeds out of the garden, but what you really got to do is make sure that they don't grow back. And that's where we're now seeing people investing in procurement at earlier and earlier stages, and, empowering procurement with greater and greater budget, because that's the team that will implement the process that prevents the same exact problem from happening again. And I think that makes this particular moment in terms of software purchasing trends a little bit different than, say, COVID-19, where it was like quick hit, companies are experiencing layoffs, contracts are getting renegotiated, and almost like that, we're back to business as usual. The funding is flowing again. I don't think that is what's going to happen here. I think that we're going to be in a downturn, if not a full-blown recession, for a little bit. Yeah, that's thoughts on the moment.
I think if I think back on it, it kind of reminds me when I send my kids off to college and I give them an Amex card and say, hey, this is for emergencies only, and then they just go buy anything they want. And that sophomore year, I'm like, okay, here we go. We're going to start to rein this back a little bit, because let me show you what you spent on your Amex card while you were away at Syracuse last year. And there's a number of contributing factors, right? Number one, SaaS model delivery of software is extremely lucrative, right? Which contributes to those higher EBITDA multipliers, which force the investment up to 40x, 45, 50x, right? Which then there's an explosion of SaaS because it's such a lucrative business. And the reason why is because ultimately, and procurement people know this, try and get your own instance of a SaaS software package cloud that they're providing on AWS or wherever they're hosting their SaaS, right? You don't get those personal instances unless you put it in an escrow account or something like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But at the same time, the theory of, hey, I'm going to build one piece of software, I'm going to update that piece of software, and then everybody uses that software. And oh, by the way, we sell this thing through the cloud, so I don't have to give you media, I don't have to updates, I update it in one place and it's updated for everybody. The model itself is a extremely lucrative model, which forced the investment, which created the explosion on SaaS and the proliferation of SaaS, so that now, I kidded about it in the pre-read with you, but there's a piece of software that's served up as SaaS that runs chandelier maintenance in some of the largest hotels in the world now, because they have RFID tags attached to the chandeliers, right? So literally everything has a SaaS component to it. And that was my next question, which was, can we get a sense of scope on this thing? But if you think about it, I was in the MarTech boom when I was back at Publicis Group, right? And in the what's it called, the Lumascape of the MarTech world, where the Lumascape started with about 1,000. It's kind of like BuyTech right now. It's like, maybe there's like 1,000 BuyTech companies out there. This is how MarTech started too. And I don't know if Michael, you know this or not, but just from being at Publicis Group, and David, you being in the agency side, it's like, okay, there's 1,000 little MarTechs and this is almost controllable. And then 5 years later, there's literally 1,000 SaaS companies that just do email automation. And there's 15,000 MarTech companies in the Lumascape as a whole. And it's just an explosion of that. And kids are buying everywhere. So if you think about, okay, you got a highly lucrative business model, you've got an amazingly simple distribution model, which is anybody with a credit card, with a corporate card, can roll in and buy an Adobe account, even though you have a master Adobe agreement or something like that, and you can buy Creative Cloud yourself or something like that. or any other SaaS solution, right? All of a sudden now everybody's a buyer. Nobody's got any control over it. Everybody's buying 1 and 2 off licenses and not buying against a corporate contract. Nothing has the end date on it. That guy leaves. He works for 2 companies down the road. He's still using your Adobe license that you get paid for, right? I mean, I've seen all of those nightmares. And now what's happening, and I think Michael, you can share this with us, is okay. We've gone through the galactic keg party of everybody's going to buy SaaS. And now it needs to be, okay, we're gonna have an orderly fashion to this, and I got to put some governance in it, and I got to make this thing save money because of not only the financial aspects of what's happening right now, but just pure governance of people saying, okay, I'm getting 57 bills from Adobe. Why am I not getting one? Right?
Yeah. No, I think what you're pointing at is like, certainly as a procurement person, hopefully you're looking at this landscape and you're saying, hey, there's a real opportunity for me to come in and make a huge difference for the company I'm working for, right? So number one, you talked about how lucrative SaaS can be. Well, that lends itself to negotiation, right? Because if we talked about this a little bit in our pre-meeting, right? But what is the cost of an additional license to someone selling it? Does that make sense? And the reality is what you end up with is, some discounts at 27%, and I've seen some discounts at 90+%, right? Because they're not necessarily losing money on selling you an additional license, right? And so, but that also creates a lot of, it's a little bit unnerving, right? Because if you go out and score a 40% discount, right, do you know if that's a good deal or not? And of course, any good procurement person hates leaving money on the table, right? So that's one thing. But you also talked about the proliferation of certain, SaaS providers. And so there's a huge opportunity there to go out, generate competition, truly find the top performing vendor, right? Make sure that they're going to be around in a few years and really de-risk the situation for the company you work for as well, right? And so and then rationalization, right? Why should you have 23, 30 Adobe contracts, right? How many of those licenses are you using, right? I had a situation, a couple months ago where, obviously when you enter into negotiation, the idea is like, hey, if I have a 40% discount now, how can I get a 50% discount? You may not want to look at it that way now. You may want to look at it as like, hey, I have 200 licenses purchased right now. Maybe I can pay a little bit more per license and only buy 100 because that's all we're actually using. Does that make sense? And so you can actually dramatically impact the financial position of your company by looking at these different levers and thinking about things creatively. But once again, a huge opportunity for procurement to shine. And I know from experience that CFOs are now turning to their procurement leaders, their procurement teams, and saying, hey, what can you do for me, right? And it's certainly really cool to feel needed, feel wanted, and feel like you can make a difference.
Are you guys seeing people pulling back on and centralizing their SaaS procurement out of places like marketplaces? Like the AWS marketplace is a dead zone for rogue spend, right? I mean, you get a bunch of guys who all of a sudden they're running the IT shop isn't running a data center anymore. They're running an AWS instance with 150, 250 instances on it. And the IT guy who's managing that virtual box somewhere is loading up, MySQL or God knows what Mongo database or something like that, right? Or Snowflake, and dropping Snowflake on an instance. Are you guys seeing that? And your clients are saying, hey, we want to get that. Yeah, we have a procurement department and we need help with that, or we don't have a procurement department and we need help with that. But we've got this massive AWS bill, because AWS bills us. We thought we were buying this, but it's this. And then when we dove into it, there's 700 different SaaS licenses inside of this thing. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, it definitely. But I will say that it depends on the size of the transaction, which, by the way, totally, that's exactly how Snowflake got to the 180% net revenue retention that they had in their last quarterly earnings statement, right? It's because sign up for it, start running, and then it just explodes, right? And what we are seeing, it's less about can we buy things on AWS marketplace and can we not? It's more like, when should we do that? And how do we ensure that we're doing it in an optimized way? And the way that that's happening is we are seeing the power to just go buy things on a marketplace get pulled back and centralized so that if you do want to buy something, you still got to submit a request the way you would anything else. And then alternatives have to be weighed. And when you think about, I don't think that marketplaces are necessarily intrinsically bad. I do think that, the 15%, 25% that AWS or whoever it is pocketing on each transaction is probably savings that you should be putting in your pocket instead. But that being said, for long tail stuff, that might be the best bang for your buck because you are going to get that discount on, money that you're taking out of your AWS commit to go buy in the marketplace. There is always, for every single one of those purchases, depending on the supplier, an inflection point where direct is going to be the much better way to go. And the only way that you're going to know that is if you are actually running a process each time one of those purchases is supposed to be made and assessing what the downstream impact is going to be from whatever that product is that you're buying. So, that Snowflake contract might be $10,000 when you're 50 people, but, it's going to be millions of dollars before you know it. So you want to make sure that you know what you're signing up for and where.
Yeah. I just want to be aware of the fact that I know that you asked a couple of questions. I see the group asking questions inside the chat. I'm not ignoring you. I'm going to get to those. Good question around artificial intelligence and chat GPT and things like that. Everybody's talking about chat GPT. We'll talk about that a little bit too. I'm glad to chew on that for a couple of seconds and get your guys' thoughts on that, because right now that's an interesting situation and where that ultimately factors into the equation from a procurement perspective, long term. I want to talk about a little bit about just like what you're stepping into when you step into a client engagement. So with a typical client, David and Michael, what can you tell me about? Do you have a typical client yet, or is it still just really kind of random? And if so, what's a typical client? What types of problems are they bringing to you? Obviously, we talked already about rogue purchasing with technology guys who go out and buy, licenses. God forbid they move on. You don't know where any of the licenses are because there's no shelf now with racks of CDs or God forbid, floppy disks or anything like that. But and there's also no central repository because they click through some click-through license agreement that nobody knows about. So there's that leads to bad documentation. And then you hit on it at the beginning, which is shelfware. Shelfware is a term that implies that the software's sitting on a shelf somewhere back in the old days when you used to get actual CD-ROMs and stuff. But virtual software, virtual shelfware, I guess is the right term. I mean, are you seeing all of this when you're walking in? And tell me a little bit about who your typical client is and what are they bringing to you and begging you for? Is it, hey, I got to save money? Is it, what about risk? And we can jump into risk too.
Yeah, I can start, and then Michael, if you want to add.
Thank you.
So our target customer today is between 100 and 5,000 employees. There are customers that we have that are larger than that. We do work with a couple Fortune 50s, but that tends to be where we focus. And we do tend to focus on technology or tech enabled or tech adjacent. All of those things just mean you have too much software, right? Yep. And too much software for us means software is, a top 3 line item, generally speaking. So if you have that, then you definitely have the problem that we solve. And the fact is that sector, tech as a sector, is the one that's being most dramatically impacted by the market right now. And I often think of tech as a bellwether for other surrounding types of businesses, because usually it happens first in tech. And tech is where we're seeing the significant, compression on the valuations and the real need to cut costs adjacent to the real problem of way too much SaaS, right? So that's kind of the perfect storm for us. And, what I would say is that for those companies right now, saving money is actually an existential concern, right? And it's like, if I can cut enough software, maybe I don't have to lay people off, for instance, or we can survive that much longer to our next funding event, or we're going to go under. And there's been a lot of companies who've gone under, right? So I think savings is not a nice to have. It's a board level discussion. We talk about it with our investors at Tropic, right? What are you doing about burn? So that's usually where it starts, but then where it goes from there, as it filters down into the world of SaaS, is usually a couple places. First, like, I need visibility. I don't even know what's out there. I don't know how we're using it. I don't know even what we're paying for necessarily out in our company. So like, let's figure that out first. Like, what is the opportunity here? 2, rationalization is a huge focus for the companies that we talk to. Maybe we don't need 6 different project management tools, right? Maybe we don't need 4 different instant messaging platforms. And those are areas that obviously, like anyone who's good at procurement's obviously looked at that before. The difference is before, the empowerment wasn't necessarily there to say, no, we're collapsing all of this to one, because you might have, engineers who are like, no, we're only going to use Jira and that's it. Marketing's only using Monday and that's it. That's different now. The ability to actually rationalize is something that is very, very real. And then I think that a lot of procurement teams are wondering, like, okay, we need to either create credible competitive tension here, or we need to switch to something that's lower cost in a couple different categories of software. And they're wondering, like, what's actually out there? Like, what is a credible competitive platform to Snowflake, right? What is a credible competitive platform to the brand new, like, Series B monitoring tool that our engineering team is using? And those are difficult questions to answer in SaaS. It's hard to even know where to start with an RFP, for instance. And then, finally, just like, where's the bottom with these suppliers? Like, what can we actually get to? We're in live or die mode right now. We're not going to be jerks about it, but if we can't find a way to take out costs, we're going down. So, what do we do next?
Or what is Snowflake a competitor to, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. What is the competitor to Snowflake, but also what's in my repertoire right now that Snowflake can replace?
Exactly.
That was traditional big iron.
Yep.
And I'm so Michael, go ahead. You any thoughts on that?
I mean, look, there's a couple things, I think back to this, I think in procurement, they use this idea of a win-win solution, right? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't strive for that, right? But the win-win situation a couple of years ago was like, hey, we want a hell of a deal on this software solution, but you're going to be able to grow with us. So we're going to start with 100 licenses, and then we're going to go to 200, and we're going to go 300, and that's this idea of a win-win, and we're going to be this marquee customer for you, et cetera, right? Right now, I think Dave touched on this, like, we're in survival mode, right? We've got these very aggressive budgets. We might have to lay people off. Our investors no longer just care about grow. They care about really strong unit economics. They want profitability, right? How do you become more profitable, right? Well, you decrease you improve your bottom line, right? And so the win-win, it really becomes this strategic, thoughtful conversation with your supplier. And I think communication is so key right now. I think that's where a lot of companies are doing it wrong, is they're going and just demanding these price decreases from their supply base. But in reality, those same suppliers also are trying to improve their top line to salvage, and not create this death spiral, right? But if you go to them and say, look, how do we keep the business with you, but still meet our budget objective or rationalization objective, or hey, we cannot afford to pay for licenses we're not using, then it becomes this creative, thoughtful process of, okay, like, let's first fix the problem. Let's first get the licenses we need at the right price point we can afford, and then grow from there, but survive this mentality first. And so I think, what we're seeing is our customers are saying, hey, we need you to go out and decrease cost, and we need you to go out and source new vendors and stuff like that. But how you go about doing it, you need to be very, very methodical and, precise, right? Because you can do this wrong and you can burn a lot of relationships, or you can bring on a really low cost provider that isn't going to stick around very long or doesn't meet your stakeholders' needs. And so that's where you can get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I think where I talk to people all the time, and one of the places where I talk to tech startups, right? Or not tech startups, but tech companies in year 4 and year 5, right? And their thought process is, we got to go out and we got to bludgeon some of our sub technology contract providers so that we can increase our margin, like, oh, we're going to use Jira, right? Okay, we're going to go beat up Jira because we're developing products and we're using Jira to help us with that. But then what they realize is, oh my God, I've over bludgeoned Jira or somebody like that, and I've upset them. And they're a mission critical part of my technology roadmap in the future. And now I'm off kind of in the desert by myself with no water, right? And I think you gotta be really careful. And I don't know if you guys have seen this or not. Here's the thing. I don't think you can do this on your own, right? And some of these companies aren't big enough yet to have procurement professionals, or if they do, it's just, early days, right? Most people under 500 million in revenue don't have procurement departments yet, as we all know. And they're making mistakes that they don't think are mistakes, which is going out and, as you said earlier, Michael, bludgeoning down the price when it's actually a mission critical relationship that you need to keep for the future. And whether that is geoeconomic pressures that are taking place now, your VC fund that's dialing up the heat on you, right? Or just your thought of, oh, I don't want to lay somebody off. You're going to be, it's immensely stressful to try and balance that all together and realize, wait a minute, I'm going to need Jira for the next 10 years, not just next month. Right.
Yeah, maybe. I think you're exactly right. Right. But you don't want to over rotate. You don't want to say, hey, our top mission critical providers, we're just going to allow them to charge whatever they want. Right.
Yeah.
Because that's the lion's share of the spend anyway. And then we're going to go beat the hell out of, who's ever left. And maybe we can just, that's not what you want to do either. Right. But if I'm dealing with those mission critical suppliers, I'm having those conversations well in advance of whatever renewals coming up. And I'm saying, okay, I'm having conversations with the business like, okay, can we move away from these, and should we move away from these if they're not willing to play ball? We still need to form those strategic alliances. So you may look at what does replacing your ERP look like, or what does replacing X, Y, and Z look like. And that's a very different discussion, a very strategic conversation than, replacing something that's maybe not, quote, mission critical either, right? But even those non-mission critical suppliers are important to handle deftly, because if you're putting your organization through a lot of unnecessary change by, hey, here's one tool, right? And then the next week, here's another tool. Well, all these tools are designed to help someone do something effectively and efficiently, right? And if they're constantly this, change going on, you don't want that either. So you want as much consistency as possible within reason, but still generating enough healthy competition and introducing better performing tools. It's not just about the cost, it's about who can do this better for us and more efficiently for us as well, right?
And David, this is what you guys, this is the nucleus of what you guys do, right? Which is, hey, listen, this is tricky. You're talking about making a decision. If you're a CFO of a hyper growth tech startup or farmer play startup or something like that, right? And you're going, you're going from $100 million a year in revenue to $1 billion a year in revenue over the next 3 to 5 years. You might not have gotten your procurement organization intact yet, or you have one generalist. And let's be honest, everything that we just talked about for the last 5 minutes of whether or not you squeeze the orange more or less, whether you value the relationship or not, if you know the intrinsic risk of relationship or not, those are all things that most people who are the first person in the door, we call them lone wolves, don't necessarily have visibility on, which is the whole reason why Tropic exists, right? Which is, hey, listen, you're going to need to start buying intelligence and market intelligence versus attempting to keep up with the market, because you just can't do it. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, sir. I mean, I believe that the future of procurement will rely on third parties of sorts, because the world of SaaS is so fast moving, right? There's a new one every 20 seconds. Incumbents get disrupted. It's just very difficult to keep your arms around that entire ecosystem, to know who's out there, number one, but definitely to know what it should cost, number two, as you think about it. And I think that partnership with a company like ours enables you to do that. And it also enables you to scale. One of the things that I think a lot of procurement teams are now looking at is like, how is this going to scale? How can we scale our efforts on this team? And especially if you're in that segment that you described, which is spot on, by the way, Mike, it's companies that are overwhelmed by their software stack generally relative to the procurement resources that they have equipped to deliver against them. It's probably going to be more cost effective to invest in resources that come to the table like Tropic, a third party that has a bench of people that can help you get through the noise, than it is to hire and train up another employee on your team, right? And then the last piece of it, to go back to the question you asked before, one of the things that I forgot to mention is that what we're finding, at least in that market segment, is that one of the most important things is the user experience that end users are having with the procurement department. What it usually looks like before we get involved is like a wiki entry that lives somewhere that's like 100 lines of text. That's like, if you want to buy this, software, you go to IT, hardware, you go over here. If it's over 100K, you go to the CFO. If it's 5K, you put it on the card. And like, they just don't follow those rules because that's not how they receive information. So like finding a way to make it easier for them to work with you is really, really critical to success.
Yeah. And maybe the one thing I'll add to that, David, is like, look, I've worked for massive companies and I've worked for smaller companies, right? And I have yet to find a procurement function that's like, hey, we're good on resources. Like we're almost, I don't want to say bored, but like we can handle it all, right? I mean, like even if you have a good performing procurement, function, even if you just have a rock star negotiator, right? I mean, the reality is like, this person can be armed with better information, right? So they know exactly what a target price on a SaaS negotiation should be for the number of licenses and things of that nature, right? Or, hey, we can arm this person with information of like, hey, you're looking for a certain vendor does X, Y, and Z. Let us tell you about 5 of our customers and why these 3 chose this one, and this one chose this one, and this one chose this one based on, the needs of that customer too. So these are all aspects that Tropic can bring to the table, and not only help finance leaders, but help procurement leaders too, and make them better at their job, more efficient at their job, and ultimately get a better results at their job as well, right? That like we're not out there trying to compete with in-house procurement teams. This is like, hey, if you don't have a procurement team, great, we can do that for you. If you do, hey, great, we offer a service and a solution for that too, that's going to make you look better and be more appreciated at your company.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. You guys jumped up to question number 9 on me, but I was going to ask you, how do you deal with probably the agita that comes with more mature IT or procurement organizations that have category management teams that have, they've got 8 people in technology. They're managing 500 million to $1 billion a year. They tend to be a little bit bigger than the 100 to 5,000 people. And there's probably a lot of stress with, oh, these guys are going to take my jobs, right? I want to hold on that for a second. I want to come back to that too. And I'm going to come back and ask you specifically how you deal with that. But before we do that, we're 40 minutes in. I want to make sure I jump into a couple of questions. Saeed asked the question, is it always convenient to go for multi-year SaaS agreements? So I want to go back to the tips and tricks of the finance and procurement leaders and what you're seeing. Is this something we talked about? We talked about, hey, you got to get access to your data. Hey, you got to know what your usage parameters are, how many seats you actually need for this stuff. Don't buy shelfware, right? And you got to know what your price point is, which is hard if you're only looking at your contracts, which is why David and his team are special, because again, they have access to more points of light than you do. And I see these emerging centers of excellence of knowledge, and I'm not surprised that it's blowing up in the SaaS space, honestly, where SaaS is now SaaS acquisition is now going to the legal side of it, where legal goes to outside counsel for assistance. I see you essentially as the outside counsel for software. That's what I see you as, right? And 100 years ago, the legal team said, we're going to keep one lawyer in house, and we're going to go to outside counsel for mergers and acquisitions, major HR problems, class action lawsuits, all these other things. We're not going to try and carry all these lawyers that know all this crap, right? Instead of that, we're going to go out to outside counsel. We're going to pay a premium for it. But those are the guys who follow this shit on a regular basis. This is that model being reenacted in the SaaS space and coming to life kind of in front of our eyes, right?
Yeah, I think that notion of kind of a fractional third party is one that creates a lot of benefit for procurement in the long run. I wanted to speak to, the multi-year question first.
I'm sorry. Yes, I jumped in on that, but go back to the multi-year
we'll
question.
get it all. So, is it advantageous? There's always going to be something that a SaaS supplier will give you for a multi-year commitment. The question is this a supplier that you want to commit to for multiple years, right? And generally, my thing is like, there are providers out there that are going to get your business. Salesforce is an example. Like, you're going to buy a Salesforce license, almost 100% of the time. Extremely unlikely that you're going to use Pipedrive or whatever other CRM alternative, especially as you grow, right? So there's going to be tools that you're inevitably going to buy, and we know what they are because we can see what everyone's buying, right? So we can see trends of like, would anybody ever actually buy a CRM that's not Salesforce? The answer is no, incidentally, right? But they might buy Databricks instead of Snowflake, right? There are other cases where they might. And like, I saw a question posed earlier in the chat, is competitive tension or RFP the way to get the best price? Most of the time, yes. Like, if you have credible competitive tension, it's kind of, it's not rocket science. It's going to get you the best price every time. For some providers, that competitive tension is not credible, though. You're not going to RFP Salesforce, right? So the way that I think about it, if I were to boil it all down, this is a basic read, but for the folks on the call, I think it's worth going as long as possible with a supplier that you know you're always going to need, right? Lock it in, get the price because they're going to raise it 5 to 15% next year anyway. Get it locked in and extend for as long as you can and get whatever discount. And we'll advise that for Salesforce. It's like, may as well get the 3-year, because they're going to increase the price if you don't. Anyone else though, I think, it might be worth your while to get a 1-year, even if you're not getting the discount you want right now, because you're set up to create credible competitive tension the next year. And that's going to be the key to getting the lower price. So I think, I don't know, I'd love to hear what you think, Michael Shields, because you're the wizard when it comes to these things. How would you answer the multi-year question?
I would agree with a lot of what you said. Even Salesforce as an example, though, if you sign a 3-year deal with Salesforce and then you do a 25% riff, all of a sudden you can end up with more licenses than you actually need. And that's a problem in and of itself as well, right? So I agree with you, David. Like, when you can say, hey, okay, this is how many licenses we need, and you really know for sure that you don't want to be switching out of this vendor, like, yeah, you want to lock that up. But I would say as a whole, we tend to over rotate on getting a marginal amount of savings and it's putting yourself in a longer term agreement. And right now, I think there's a sweet spot. I think 2 years I feel good about for certain suppliers, like a good chunk of them. If it's a new vendor, I'm trying to do something creative. I'm like, hey, look, maybe it's a 1 year with a unilateral option to extend for another year or something like that. And in this market where, suppliers are hungry, like I see them more willing to do that. But the reality is I need them to prove themselves, right? That they're going to do exactly what they say they're going to do. But then I also need to protect against the risk upside there too. But certainly, I structured a deal a few months ago and I felt really good about locking in a 5-year deal, which, in the tech world is a long time, but it was because this was a very very strategic part of our roadmap. And we definitely didn't want, to be upside down on, or not upside down, but, subject to increases in it down the road. But we were very thoughtful about how many licenses we were buying out of the gate with optionality to increase that during the term of the contract. But what we're seeing right now is a lot of CFOs or leaders come to us and saying, hey, I'm in the middle of a 3-year agreement and I don't use this anymore, or I don't want this anymore, or, like it's too expensive. And you certainly can, there are options there, but it's a lot trickier. Let's be honest.
Yeah. My experience, and I'll throw on my GPO, my chief procurement officer hat for a minute. In my 20 years of technology sourcing, unfortunately, it's going to sound like a consultancy answer. It depends. It depends on the deal. Every deal is different. A 3-year deal where I've got termination for convenience or scaled back pricing, or, hey, like you said, you don't know what merger and acquisition stuff is coming down the pipe 3 years down. Somebody might, you might be buying 10,000 seats or something, or 5,000 seats or something. And now all of a sudden you're locked into a 3-year deal and somebody just merged you with another company, and that company wants to hold you to that. The company you're getting merged with has 50,000 seats and they can't get you in underneath their price point because you have a 3-year agreement. You end up paying for 3 years on a price point that's 50% more than you should. There's tons of reasons for it and against it. And also, and like David said, my experience, the big boys, yeah, there's a reason why you don't sign a Microsoft Enterprise agreement for less than 36 months, right? But even that has annualized true ups. Try truing down, good luck, right? But on the small stuff, one of the big things, and I know we talked about this offline when we first started chatting, if you're talking about a tech startup, somebody who's 2-3 years in, they haven't gotten the profitability yet, to me, that's one of the biggest risks you can take, is a long-term relationship with a company that's desperate to get to Series C around funding so that they can get the profitability. Personally, I think it's one of the biggest problems in 2023, 2024 is the drying up of VC funds in the tech space, including the biotech space, where people aren't at profitability yet as a company, and yet you have integrated this thing into the key mission critical aspect of your business, whether that's a fintech product or an HR product or a sales product. You're going with a CRM tool that has yet to get the profitability yet, and they're at Series C funding. If you don't have that code in escrow, you're looking at being the guy who made a decision on a mission critical system that might not get that Series C, and all of a sudden you've got to move to Salesforce. Good luck with that.
you want to take that one? I was just gonna say,
Somebody gonna
what's
jump on that
interesting-
wagon with me or no?
Yeah. So what's interesting about it is, first of all, find out what the runway is as a part of your RFP, find out, if they're profitable, what the path is. This is a question that I think companies were more hesitant to answer in the past, but now they know they kind of have to. And what changes here is,
I don't know about that, man. I think you guys have it because you guys do this all day long. I think guys that are in CFO positions in hyper growth startups and things like that, I don't know if they're asking, hey, show me your path to profitability on this MarTech tool. They absolutely should be. They absolutely should be, but they're not doing it, which is why you guys have jobs.
I think to David's point, though, is maybe they were more reluctant to be sharing that, even if you were asking. And right now, it's kind of one of those status quo of like, hey, we need to make sure you're going to be around in a couple of years. Now, it also depends on what problem they're solving, because if it is one of those things where you can absorb that risk, then that's okay, right? And so once again, you factor that into this kind of weighted analysis, right? But like if this is a mission critical, like it's baked into our product and it's going to go out and it's a startup that's been around 3 months, like, gosh, I'm making sure everyone and their mom signs off on this, because I don't want to be the person that says, yeah, this is a great deal. It's half the price, but then they're not going to be there in 6 months.
All right, as expected, we're at 50 minutes. We should have booked 2 hours for this damn session. I knew it was going to fly. I want to get in and I want to get into the chat and I want to get some answers on some of the chat stuff.
Mike, I saw one of the, at least I thought I saw here, and I know it's tips and tricks, right? But what happens if you're mid-cycle in a contract, right? Yep. So there's an amazing opportunity out there. Let's say you're at year 2 mark or year 3 mark, and you've got a year left on a software deal, right? There's no reason you can't reach out to that vendor and say, hey, look, there's a year left. Let's restructure this to bring my costs down, but tack on a year to the end of the contract. Does that make sense? Like,
that's a huge win.
It's a missed opportunity that people are, because what the way you sell it to that supplier is like, look, you may be concerned, right, that like we're going to move away from you. And maybe that's a legitimate concern. But if you can lower our costs now by 20% or whatever our objective is, we'll go ahead and rip up the contract, extend a year out. And hopefully by the end of that year, we're in warmer waters, we're in greener territory, right? And so don't wait necessarily. Or another option is, right, is you're like, hey, let's say you're just barely into a 3-year agreement. Well, maybe we talked about rationalization, right? Maybe there's other contracts that coming up for renewal that you can redeploy into this other vendor that has a longer term agreement, but then also get them to, say, hey, we were spending, $100 a license on this product. We'll add this product, but lower, the cost to $80 a license, whatever it is, and then sunset another product. Like rationalization is your best friend right now too.
Yeah, and
until contracts expire.
And that extend the recognizable revenue model, that theory of throwing out, hey, I want to give you something. I want to give you the ability to recognize revenue for an additional 12 months beyond what our current contract is and lock me in now. Because right now at 12 months, this is the time where I'm going back to my IT team and saying, hey, if we got to rip and replace, now's the time I need to know.
Yep.
Right. So it's a pivotal time between 12 and 18 months out on the renewal of a long-term contract to get them secured in for another long-term. That is a good way, by the way, in my experience, to get around that thing that I threw out earlier, which is the M&A issue, which is, hey, I've got an M&A issue and you're going to hold my new acquisition to their previous price point of stupid land. How about if I take that, roll that in and give you another 9 months on the back end of the contract that I have, if you give me the price point? Sometimes they'll take the revenue recognition to get the M&A underneath one umbrella. And for the 9 months, if you're already there, if you're less than 12 months away, you're not moving away from a mission critical system, right? So that's the other thing too, that I think is probably a best practice is you got to go back to your partners in your space, whether it's IT, MarTech, whatever, figure out what the timetable is, how much tarmac you have to move some of these systems. Because if you show up calling David or Michael with 90 days to go and say, hey, listen, I need to get out of Salesforce or I need to get out of Snowflake and move to Databricks, bro, we're not miracle workers. I can get you a great price and I can get you I can give you some amazing benchmarking. I can't, they can. But at the same time, I can't guarantee you that you're going to be off. You're going to be paying twice. You're going to have the pig and the python. You're going to have two pieces of software.
You're getting pretty creative at that point. And certainly, look, we can pull miracles occasionally, but the likelihood that our batting average goes down, right? But my point is, I can't believe how many customers and procurement people say, hey, we're not going to look at this contract because we're locked in. I'm like, whoa.
I love that tidbit, which is mid-cycle contact. All right. So let's talk about, somebody said something. So that was one of the questions. Another one was around GPOs and government spending. Did you see those two questions, David? You want to jump in on one of those?
Yeah, definitely. I will say that we're not currently working with any government companies. So how we would approach that from a Tropic standpoint, I don't have a great answer. Better, I think, to be upfront about that. You know, the preferred pricing and the role of GPO in government, from what I've heard at least, is pretty effective. And from what I've seen in nonprofit is pretty effective, although there's definitely a segment of nonprofit SaaS providers or SaaS providers who sell to nonprofit that don't yet have that preferred pricing. If you already have like really good rates that are being delivered through a system like that, and you have, you know, licenses being bought in bulk and then sold to you from a GPO, I don't have a great strategy from the Tropic standpoint, quite candidly, because it's not something that we typically get involved with. The only thing that I would say is, you know, where we will, if I had to kind of hypothesize on it, what we will often do is RFP resellers, for instance. Like we'll have customers that are getting good price points from different resellers, they think, but putting it out to market, you know, those resellers and those GPOs have a margin that they get to play with a little bit. And there is a way to drive efficiency there through kind of leveraging competitive dynamics. But sorry, I couldn't answer a little more directly. It's not something that I have direct experience with.
I'll just add a quick second onto that. Like, don't trust that just because you're getting it from a GPO that you can't do better on your own.
Yeah.
The volumes are smaller.
Bingo.
Right? Like, look, these companies are selling to the masses, say, okay, there's a bottom line that we don't want to go below because it impacts our margin, right? If I'm a smaller SaaS player, a lot of times I go below it if it's an end of quarter deal or something like that, because they're trying to fill a void or something like that. So I've just seen time and time again where if you're strategic and thoughtful and you know good at what you do, like you can beat a GPO price.
I'm going to give you 30. Yeah, I'll give you 30 seconds on government spend too. The first thing I did when I left corporate world was I looked at the corporate contract for RICO for the state of Massachusetts, right, for photocopiers, because I had just finished a massive RICO contract, and it was fresh on the brain. The contract for Massachusetts to buy RICO copiers is actually based out of Nevada. They're just an affiliate of the Nevada agreement, right? Keep one thing in mind, ladies and gentlemen, with government spending. They are not attempting to get the best price. They are attempting to get the most stable price for the existence of that contract. So if you go to somebody and go, hey, listen, I need one price in my budget for the next 5 years to buy photocopiers, what price do you think that's going to be? Do you think it's going to be competitive? Or do you think they're going to build a price point that goes, oh my God, the price of semiconductors is going to go up by 300% over the next 5 years? We have to build that margin into this contract now for the next 5 years. They are not negotiating best prices in government contracts. If you think you do, okay, that's great. God bless you. Okay, good luck. Maybe NASA is. Maybe NASA is. I don't know. But I'm telling you right now, if you go look at the Lenovo contract for any state in the United States to buy off of, or the RICO contract or any hardware, you're getting crushed. You could, I wouldn't buy that off that contract if my life depended on it in the private sector. If they all worked for us in the private sector, they'd be fired for writing that contract. Let me tell you that. All right. Listen, we're almost out of time. I want to go back to you two guys. Like I said earlier, I see you guys as the new outside counsel experts that I don't think anybody else can buy. I believe 2023 is the year where procurement makes a very big pivot, which is we're going to start to buy knowledge versus build knowledge. I see us going to outside counsel, and I'm thrilled that it's SaaS because it's such a big spend and it's everywhere inside of our organizations. It takes something like SaaS to get us to outside counsel, and I'm glad that David and his team and others are filling that void for us, because quite candidly, you just can't hire people fast enough and keep them up with the marketplace like a team like this has. So if you're not doing it, you got to seriously contemplate it. Michael, David, one thing, if there's one thing for people to take away today, what is the one thing they should take away with? Michael, I'm going to start with you. What's the one takeaway for people today? And then David, yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you get very few opportunities in life to really kind of seize the moment. Like if you're procurement, like now's this moment, right? I mean, make the most of it, and you know, you can really slingshot your career. You can make a huge difference in your organization, and they're going to value it more than they ever have, at least in the past 10 years. So let's go.
Yeah. David, before you answer, wait a minute, David, before you answer, one thing on that. I also want to make this clear. I don't think this is a rip and replace for CPS. I think this is a knowledge augmentation. I think there's a place for you to have a subject matter expert on software and on SaaS as a whole, and your technology IT category manager, and bring somebody like Tropic in at the same time. I think this is an enhancement mechanism, not a replacement mechanism.
Absolutely.
So I just want to make that perfectly clear, because people are asking me, oh, Mike, jobs and job security. I think this is an enhancement to your existing software management team to be able to use you for just sheer third-party outsourced knowledge and help with expertise and benchmarking. I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that dovetails very nicely with what I was going to say, which is, whether it's us or, another method, like, I think that this year to be effective requires information symmetry, and to get information symmetry requires having a strategy and an investment thesis behind how are we going to get data on our SaaS footprint. And by the way, a lot of those providers, Gartner doesn't know anything about yet, right? The engineering tools and stuff like that.
They're not on a magic quadrant. They're not big enough to be paying Gartner yet.
Yeah, and what's interesting though is that those are the companies that are still getting funded, right? Those late stage private companies are the ones that can't raise. Series A and seed stage companies are still raising money. It's, that part of the market is still open for business. So get a strategy for that. And to piggyback on what Mike said, we have engagements where we don't offer any service at all. All we offer is data. And that's actually better for us, from an efficiency standpoint. So if you need answers that you don't have, we're happy to help. Great.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm sorry that the 60 minutes went by that fast. I'd love to do this again with you sometime soon. Really appreciate your insights. If you're in that 100 to 5,000 user space and you want to have questions about your SaaS stack, these are the guys to go talk to, okay? All right, gentlemen, take care. Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, you can find them inside of Procurement Foundry because they are a sponsor of ours. Thank you very much, David, to you and the team for your continued support of Procurement Foundry. And obviously, you can find David and the team up on LinkedIn and anywhere else. If you didn't get to your questions, I'm really sorry about that. It kind of flew by, but feel free to shoot you guys an email, okay? All right, thanks, guys.
Later, everybody.
Thanks, everybody on LinkedIn. Take care. Bye-bye.